أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي فضل الإسلام على سائر الأديان وفضل أمة الإسلام على سائر الأمم وفضل محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم على الخلق أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم عبد الله ورسوله أما بعد. We thank the Almighty Allah for giving us another opportunity to be here today. We thank Him for His mercies that He's bestowed upon us. We bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except the Almighty Allah. We also bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His servant and His messenger. Today is a Thursday, which corresponds with the 23rd day of Zulhijjah, 1441 years after the Hijrah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And today is also the 13th day of August 2020. We've been absent for, I think, 2 weeks. We didn't have our class because of one or two reasons. Alhamdulillah, the Almighty Allah has given us another opportunity to come to you with this, Islamic philosophy class. We're just trying to, give Islamic perspective on some, day in, day out issues that are disturbing young Muslims. The kind of questions young Muslims are asking and the kind of answers that they really, really want, that they really, really deserve. And we live in times whereby the young Muslim is bombarded from left, right, and center on all issues concerning life. So the young Muslim needs answers. The young Muslim is asking the questions, the hard, tough questions, because of the young Muslims' exposure to, a lot of civilizations, a lot of ideologies, a lot of philosophies, a lot of, isms and policies. So the young Muslim is asking the questions. He looks at his religion, and then he looks at other people's ways of life. And then within the context of that, he's comparing, what does Islam have to offer for him as a young man or a young woman? And then what are these other civilizations or other cultures offering? Recently we are having a back and forth with, a young lady concerning, Miss Muslima Ghana. It's part of these things that you find young Muslims, they have this desire, they see something that other civilizations or other cultures are doing. They don't see it in Islam. They feel it is something good. They feel it's a form of liberation, a form of empowerment. So why don't they, pick this thing and then, find ways to polish it and make it look Islamic and then, use it. So it's a dilemma. And you find out that most often than not, some of these young Muslims who are into these things do not have the adequate Islamic knowledge to be able to maneuver through all these, storms and all this, attack and all these, ideas. So it is upon some of us who, alhamdulillah, by virtue from the Almighty Allah, we're able to, read, understand, and try as much as possible to bring things to the fore for the young Muslims like myself, because I'm a young Muslim. I go through the dilemma that young Muslims go through, but then alhamdulillah, by virtue of us being, educated in Islamic sciences, we're able to find our feet one way or the other, even though it's not all the time that we're able to maneuver. So this is the reason behind the Islamic class, the Islamic philosophy class, if you're not following us. And this is what we want to do, khairan inshallah. So today we are going to look at the translation movement. We looked at, the history of Islam, knowledge in Islam. We saw the Islamic learning centers. We saw, the Islamic learning centers, the king's palaces, the bookstores. Today we are going to look at, the translation movement. When we say the translation movement, if you observe the beginning of Islam, it started with the Arabs. Even though there are some people in there who are not Arabs from the beginning, like Bilal, who was an Ethiopian, like Suhail, who was an European, and then Salman, who was a Persian. But the major, people that Islam started with were the Arabs. And the Arabs have their language, they have their culture. But when the Islamic, empire grew and expanded and other cultures came in, then the need, to look at what these cultures have vis-a-vis what Islam provides, and then be able to assimilate it or be able to, correct where the need of correction to be. For example, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he started his advent, there were cultures within the Arab, that he had to change, that Islam had to modify, that Islam had to correct. There were some that Islam maintained. There were some that Islam abolished totally. So in the same light, the expansion of the Islamic, civilization brought with it the Persians, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Arabs already were there, the Romans, the Indians, and stuff like that. And these people came with them all forms of civilizations, all forms of cultures, all forms of ideologies in different languages, in Greek, in Roman, in Mesopotamian, in the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and the Indians, and then stuff, and the Persian language. So the Islamic Empire, if you can Google the Islamic Empire at its prime, was very huge, very, very vast. And then the Muslim leaders had to, put things under control. With all these different nationalities and different, people, the need for, export and import of culture became very important. And then the major medium of the import and the export of culture is language. So they need to do something about that. And that necessitated the translation movement. So the translation movement was the Muslims translating manuscripts from Greek, from Roman, from Syriac, from Indian, from Persian, from Chinese into Arabic for the usage of the Muslim population, which was predominantly Arabic, and also the language of the civilization or of the empire was Arabic. So they had to translate these information. And also they had to translate some of, Islamic information into other languages for the people who were coming in, for the people who were not Arabs, for the people who didn't understand the Arabic language. They need to also translate Islamic information into their languages was also important. So the import and the export of these, civilizations and materials or information became very, very important. We are going to look at some definitions of translations that people have made, or some types of translation. We have tarjamatul harfiya, which happens to be the word for word translation. Word for word translation. So he is a boy, huwa walad. So that's word for word translation. It is the worst form of translation, because translating word for word can take the meaning out of context, can change the definition, can change, the import of the message. Why? Because every language has its own, grammar, its own syntax. So you can't translate word for word from one language into another language, because the translating language has its own structure, its own syntax, its own grammar, its own morphology. The other language has also its own. So if you're going to translate word for word, because he is a boy, and then you want to translate it like that, he is a boy, into another language, you will not get it. It's going to sound weird. The other thing is that every language has its vocabulary, its choice of words. For example, in similes and metaphors and proverbs, if you're going to translate proverbs word for word, you're not going to get it. And then the language that you're translating into, the people will not even get what you're trying to say, because the choice of word and then the vocabulary in one language is different from language. So we need to have, a very nice and precise way of doing it. So word for word translation, and it's not something that is good. It's bad. It's worse. And then the second form of translation, the Arabs call tarjamatu bit tasarruf, which is you translate, but then you, the translator, has an effect on the material you're translating. And this is a very, very hard form of translation. Very, very difficult in the sense that if you're translating and then you, the translator, is having your input in the translation, it means you must be well versed in the two languages. The first language, that is the translation that is being done, and then the other language that you are translating into. You must, because if you're going to do that form of translation, then it means you're going to add, you're going to take something out so that it suits the language that you're translating into. And then the other form of translation is translation of context. This time around, you, the translator, you don't have any input in there, but then you read a paragraph and then you pick the idea of that paragraph from what the writer is saying, and then you translate it into the language that is being translated into. So these are just, some forms of translation that we have. If you look at the Quranic translation, for example, if you have the Quran on your phone, and some Quran apps give translation options. If you look, you have different forms of translation. Abdullah Yusuf Ali, Sahih International, Mahmoud Mohammed Piktal, Usman Taqi, I think I have 4 or 5 translations. And anytime you look at a verse, these translations give you different choice of words, which when you are trying to translate those translations in English back to original Arabic, it will be very, very difficult for you to get the right words used by the Quran. That is why studying the Quran in another language other than Arabic is not encouraged, in a sense that you don't get the gist of the material, the message that the Quran is giving. You don't get it in another language. Let me tell you, you don't even get it in another wording in Arabic language. So it's not even about translating the Quran into English or French or Japanese. If you look at the Quran and then you understand Arabic and then you try to, use a different choice of words from the wording of the Quran, even in the Arabic language, it doesn't send the right import that the word used by the Quran sends. That is why most often than not, people who want to criticize the Quran and then they do it in English without recourse to the Arabic language, they make a mess of themselves, because they are using someone else's understanding of the Quran to challenge the Quran or to find fault with the Quran. So you find them making mistakes that 6-year-old boys or 7-year-old girls or 9-year-old girls in Islam will just look at them and laugh, because that is not what the Quran is saying. So I urge anybody, if you really want to have issues with the Quran, study it in the Arabic language. Then you can make the punches that you want to make. And then I'll tell you for sure, if you don't accept it, is by Allah's will that you didn't. If you study the Quran in Arabic and then you want to attack it, go and read the history of Dr. Maurice Bucaille. Look for this book, The Bible, the Quran, and Science. Look for that book. Read the book. Read the history of the author, and then find out what happened. He was given a contract to write something bad about the Quran. He was a French doctor, medical officer. So he went to the Arab country and he studied Arabic for 5 years. He became fluent in the Arabic language. Then he picked the Quran from cover to cover, trying to find scientific errors, mathematical mistakes, and logical errors with the Quran. After studying the Quran, he took the Bible, the Quran, and Science. Get that book and read. It's about 150 pages to 200 pages. It's not a huge book. You can finish that in 3 days or 4 days. You can do that if you're a slow reader. If you're a fast reader, you can finish that in 2 days. Wonderful book. And find out what he wrote. There is also Professor Kitmore of Canada, a professor of embryology, and then what he had to say about the Quran. So I'm saying anybody who wants to have issues with the Quran, study the Arabic language. If you're really genuine, you don't study someone's work in another language. It's like trying to find issues with Chinese language, but then you are reading the translation of the book in English. You will not be able to do anything. In the end, you will end up critiquing the translator and not the translated material. What are the reasons that led for, the translation movement? Why did Muslims decide to translate some of these material? We said that the Muslim nation had expanded. It had become very big, very, very large. It had tasted now, and it has gone hungry, because there has been influx of, foreign people into the civilization, into the empire. And then it had brought with it new challenges, new people, new cultures, new things within the Islamic, framework. And then the Muslim nation had this aim of ruling the world. So if you want to rule the world, you must be faced with challenges, and then you must be ready to summon challenges, and then you must be ready to put in place mechanisms that will let you rule and dominate the world. The powerful nations of the world today, if you visit them, you find out that you have everybody in there. You go to the United States, for example, everybody is here. Everybody. Chinese, Japanese, English people, Africans, American, everybody is there. And you find out that everybody there is working on merits. People who are earning, some of the top earners in the United States are Indians. Nigerians are earning big money in the United States. So the Islamic civilization was faced with that dilemma. So what did the Islamic civilization do? It had to translate, these people who are coming in, their cultures, their ideologies, their tastes, because different communities, different people, we need to understand them. We need to understand how they think. We need to understand what they eat. We need to understand the way they dress. We need to understand how things move with them, because within the Islamic legal framework itself, there is, a legal maxim that speaks about people's cultures. Al-urf, al-ada muhakkama. People's cultures are very well recognized in the Islamic legal framework. So when other cultures are coming into the Islamic civilization, they need to understand their cultures to make it fall within the Islamic legal framework was very important. For example, in some cultures, men wear wrappers instead of pants or trousers or shorts. Cultures, it is the women that do that. So we need to understand some of these cultures. For example, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the Almighty Allah curses a man who dresses like a woman and a woman who dresses like a man. In some cultures, the dressing of men, in other cultures, are the dressing of women. If you come to my native home, Ghana, for example, the hours in the Volta region, the men tie wrapper, tying cloth around their waist. Tying the wrapper around the waist, it is a dressing of women. If you go to Nigeria, the Igbos and then the Yorubas, they tie wrapper around their waist, that is men. But then if you go to northern Nigeria, the Hausa and the Fulani people, tying of wrappers around the waist is the dressing of women. So within the same country, but then because of different cultures, different rulings are going to apply. So we can't use one culture as the base to give rulings on general cultures of people. So Islam, in trying to understand people's cultures, brought in, these translations. So for example, if you go to northern Nigeria, Kano, and then you go and find Imam wearing a wrapper, a Hausa man wearing a wrapper around his waist to pray, then that prayer is invalid, because that dressing in his culture, it is a female dressing, so he's not supposed to dress like that. But then when you go to the Igbo land or you go to the Yoruba land, and then you find a man, Imam, tying wrapper around his waist, you, the Hausa Fulani Ramadan, shouldn't say, hey, this man is dressing women dressing. So to use this as an the need to translate, people's, cultures and ideas and understanding is very, very important. And then it was one of the reasons that the translation movement came about. Another part of this reason is that any nation that is only enclosed upon itself cannot rule anybody else. Let me put it into this perspective. Any nation that is racist, that is racial on its own, it only covers its own. It doesn't open up for other people, other race, other cultures, other ideologies to come in for intermingling and interaction. That race cannot rule any world. You don't rule anybody. Any community that wants to develop and open itself must open itself up for other cultures, so that there's going to be this interaction and forth between people of different races and then different ideologies. The second reason for the translation movement was that because of the nature of, the civilization or the empire, the Muslim empire, and then the need, to study people's cultures, as we said earlier on, that this diversity was also very, very important. To translate these books or these cultures into the Arabic language for the benefit of the Muslims was also very, very important. The other reason for translation was that the Islamic empire had neighbors who were not Muslims. And these people had their own, cultures. Now, to safeguard the pristine Islamic culture of Tawheed, because these people who were around, the Persians and in their religions, the Chinese and in their religions, the Mongols and in their religion, the Indians and in their religion, the Egyptians and their religion, the Romans and their religion, themselves and their religion, and stuff like that, which had, opposite effect on Tawheed. The need to protect Tawheed was very important. And some historians put this as the first reason to protect Tawheed from all these, different ideologies. There's the need to translate books of Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemy, and all these Greek philosophers who had, these, polytheist ideas that were in their books. The need to translate these books into Arabic was very, very important. So the Muslims realized that those living around them had different cultures than them, different cultures from what they have. So they needed to translate these cultures' ideologies into Arabic, so that the Muslim scholars of Tawheed and Kalam will look at it and say, okay, fine, this is okay for Islam. No, this is not okay for Islam. So fast forward to 21st century, if you see anything that non-Muslims are doing and then you want to copy, make sure you bring it in front of Islamic scholars of Tawheed and Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let them go through it and tell you, this is okay, you can go ahead. There's nothing wrong with this. This is wrong with it. This is wrong. There's everything wrong with it. You must throw it away. And this was some of the things that, young Muslims were facing at that time, and still now young Muslims are facing these things. There is a lady who called me and then she said she doesn't want to get married, but give birth. Is it okay for her to do artificial insemination? A Muslim young lady. She is in her early 20s. She called me. She said, Sheikh, I don't want to get married. I've seen other people get married and it's full of disappointment, full of pain. But I love children. I want to have children of my own. But then the idea of living with a man, I don't get it. I can't. I want to live single. I want to live independent. I want to be alone. So is it okay for me to go in for artificial insemination? Because even the artificial insemination, I didn't commit zina. I didn't sleep with any man. It's just injunction that I was given, and it's okay for me, and I can give birth, and that's it. And I asked her, you want to have the semen of a random man? You don't know who he is. You don't know where he's from. You don't know the character he has. You don't know anything about him. And parents' genes have influence on kids. And if they inject you with that man's semen and then you get pregnant, there's a high tendency that that child will come out looking like that man. And you want to raise a child of a man that you don't know anything about. You don't know anything about him. You don't know him. You want to hold such a baby in your womb and cherish and love that baby without knowing who the father is. She is in the US. She's seen this culture. And as a young Muslim lady, she's being enticed by it. Not that she doesn't get suitors. Men come to seek her hand in marriage, but then she's not interested in marriage because she thinks marriage is just, taking care of a big baby called a man. And she doesn't want to have that commitment. So she feels she wants to have artificial insemination and then give birth and then take care of her child alone. And I told her, don't you think that you are going to violate the right of that child again? In the sense that every child needs parents, mother and father, male and female, for proper nurturing in the home. So you want your daughter or your child to grow up without the presence of a father. And I told her, in the United States, statistics show that homes that do not have fathers have a high rate of crime. High rate of crimes are from families that the men are not at home. They are either out there or in the prisons. But then no presence of men in the homes in the US are the major causes of crime. This is the statistics that the authorities know. So after giving her this information from even, the psychological and then, only point of view, I told her Islam allows artificial insemination in only a husband and a wife. And even that in circumstances where the husband is not physically capable of impregnating the wife. And that there are other conditions that must be met before that artificial insemination is even accepted between a husband and a wife. So these are some of the dilemmas that we face. So the Muslims in the early civilization realized that there is a need to translate these books because they had these neighbors who had all these forms of ideologies. And that those ideologies go against the spirit of Islam. So they need to translate these books, and then the scholars have to sit on the books and read them and say, no. This doesn't work with Islam. This is not applicable in Islam. No, this, we can modify it to suit Islam. This, no matter how we dress a donkey, is still going to be an ass. We cannot use it in Islam. Okay, as for this one, it is normal. We can take it, we can use it, we can work with it. The other thing is that the Muslim nation had neighbors who had civilizations of years ahead. So they had advanced in medicine, they had advanced in science and technology, they had advanced in astronomy and stuff like that. So the Muslims were taking from them, not just wholesale, they took from them, they criticized it, they purified it, and then they built upon it. Very important. The Muslim scientists that you hear of Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algorithms, Al-Jabir, the father of algebra, and stuff like At-Tusi, and stuff like that, the fathers of optics, Al-Haytham and the rest, when they received these translated books of science, mathematics, engineering, medicine, and stuff, after they are being translated, after they themselves translated them into Arabic from Greek, from Persian, and stuff like that, they didn't just pick them wholesale. No. They didn't pick them wholesale. In our Islamic philosophy class, we'll come and speak about some of these scientists and then the work that they did and how Western scientists stole their work. Yes, stole their work. Some copied, some stole, some of them tore off the cover of the book and then they put their own covers and then put their names there. So we'll look at that. But then these scientists, they criticized constructively, observed, criticized, and then after that they modified it and then they built upon it. So you go to the Islamic civilization in Spain and Portugal, in Cordoba, in Granada, in Toledo, in Ishbilia and the stuff, and then you read the Islamic empire was the Arabic language. That's the major language. And that they wanted the Arabic language to be, the language of power. So if you want your language to be the language of power, then all informations that the world needs must be in your language. Now the language of power in the world is the English language. Yes. I went to Ethiopia for a conference and I couldn't read Amharic, but then every signboard had two languages, the Ethiopian Amharic language and then the English language. Yes. You go to Dubai, it's the same thing. You go across the world, it's the same thing. The language of power now is the English language. So if you write a book now in the English language, it goes faster than any other language. So at that time, the language of power was the Arabic language because of the Islamic civilization and the position that Islamic civilization occupied geographically. So they were translating every book into Arabic language to make the Arabic language the language of power. This will make other civilization thirst for that information or for that knowledge, and then they troop in to the Islamic world to study the Arabic language and then have that information. It's the same way that we leave, our countries to come to the United States, to go to Britain, to go to China, to go to Turkey, to go and study, and then we end up studying their languages. Because these people are producing information and knowledge in their language. So if there's any new invention by the Turkish, they are not going to write it in English. They're going to write it in Arab, in their Turkish language. If there's any invention by the Chinese, they're not going to write it in another language. They're going to write it in the Chinese language. So if anybody needs that information, you need to study the Chinese language first to be able to get access to that language. So that is what the Muslims were also trying to do. That let's translate these books into Arabic because we want to have power. We want to have civilization. We want to dominate the world. So let's translate these books into our language. And then when we build upon them and invent new information or get new information, it is in our language. So anybody else outside our language who needs this information will have to come to us to study our language. By studying our language and our culture, we are exporting our culture to these people. And that's what the Americans are doing. And you can't begrudge them for that. Another, reason for the translation was that because of different ideas, creeds, and religions that have entered the Muslim empire. Yes, the Muslim empire was not only full of only Muslims. No, the Muslim empire had Muslims, Christians, Jews. It had Hindus in there. It had Chinese who were coming in. It had Sabians. It had Asian, Egyptian religion. They had everybody in there. So there were debates about religious matters, especially philosophical debates. So the Muslims had to translate some of these philosophical books of Aristotle and Plato and stuff like that, and then read them and see how best we can present Islam to these people, present the better alternative to Aristotle's philosophy, to Plato's philosophy, to Socrates' philosophy. We have better than what they have. So let's translate the books. So when we read them, we know, this is where Aristotle got to. We have better things to give and deliver. So that way, in philosophical debates and propagation and evangelism, they had to translate some of these books. Another thing we're going to look at, we can't have. I have 3 more papers to go, and I'll have to run because it's almost time for Salat. But then language, since they translated the books into Arabic language, and then these books were more of philosophical and creed books and theological books, They translated them, and then they were able to fight the ones that were against Islamic theology and creed. That had the tendency of, diluting Islamic creed. The scholars were able to, decipher them and then sieve them and say, no, this is not for us. This is for them. Let them keep theirs, and it's not going to touch us. So it was able to protect the Islamic creed. The other thing was that the translation movement made, science and technology and discovery, it gave it prominence in the Islamic world. It gave it prominence. The other thing was that the translation movement enriched Islamic libraries with new information, from literature to medicine, to astronomy, to mathematics, to all kinds of information. The translation movement enriched the Islamic libraries. Another thing was that the translation movement gave the Muslims a better understanding of older civilizations. It gave them better understanding of older civilizations, and then it also gave them better understanding of their neighbors, the nations around them, and how best to live with them. The other effect of the translation movement was that it protected knowledge from dying out. So the Muslims were able to continue the work of the Greeks before them, the works of the Chinese before them, the works of the Indians before them, the works of the Romans before them, the works of the Mesopotamians before them, the works of the Egyptians before them. So they were able to continue that. So whatever information that we are having from ancient Greece is partly, if the huge or major part of it is through the Muslim scientists and the Muslim translators. Another thing was that the translation movement brought about with it the book industry. Yes, booking industry. Because of translation, of writing of books, book binding, paperwork industry flourished. I think it's time for Salat. We'll pause here, and then we'll begin another time when we look at, some of, the translators. Yes, some of the translators who were very, very famous translators in the Islamic world. And we're going to look at non-Muslim translators. Yes, we had non-Muslim translators, Christian, Jewish, Sabian translators who were found in the courts of the Muslim kings and princes, and then they gave them positions. They were not Muslims. Majority of the translators were Muslims, but then I'm not mentioning the name of the Muslims. We're going to look at the non-Muslim ones to tell everybody that the Muslim empire opened its doors for everybody, irrespective of color, irrespective of your creed, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of your status, your background. The Muslims opened their doors for everybody. And Islam is not a racial religion. Islam is not a religion that discriminates. Islam opened its doors for everybody to come and study and to make an impact in the Islamic civilization. Thank you very much for listening to us. It's been a while since we were on your screens. It's been almost 2 weeks, but hopefully next week we're going to have a full time, inshallah. Stay safe. Thank you very much. It's time for Salat. Wherever you are, Salat, I need to pray. It's part of the Islamic philosophy. You need to pray on time. Thank you very much for listening to us. Stay safe, stay blessed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.